There's been a royal baby in the British royal family. To be precise, there should have been one. Do you know who I mean? King Charles's youngest brother, Prince John. You may have heard of him, or maybe you haven't, but to put it simply, he was meant to be the future king. But then he wasn't. And nobody knows exactly why. Prince John was born in 1905, 3 years before his older brother, Edward, the future King Edward VIII, and 7 years before another future king, George VI. Like most royal babies, he was carried by his mother, Queen Mary, wife of George V, and like most royal babies, he was anticipated with joy by his parents and the rest of the country. A third son would consolidate the succession and avert yet another potential constitutional crisis. The last one had been averted when George and Mary had produced a son after the abdication of their eldest daughter, Victoria. That was known as the Town and Country Set. If they hadn't done that, there might have been a big constitutional crisis. There were various candidates who might have become king instead, including Mary's brother, the future King Ferdinand of the Scots. It wouldn't have been good for the stability of the country if there'd been a big rumpus over who should be monarch. So back to Prince John, the healthy baby boy. His birth was announced all around the kingdom and people celebrated with bonfires and fireworks. But something went wrong. Why? We don't know. There are many theories, but nobody really knows. Perhaps John had a bad case of neonatal jaundice. Perhaps he was stillborn, and they hid it from the Queen Mother. Some say he died because he aspirated milk during a feeding. Others claim he drowned accidentally in a bucket in nursery. Some say he was smothered by a nurse or a nanny, though nobody knows which one, and certainly not why. What we do know is that within days of his birth, he was taken away from his distraught mother and given into the care of others. Most likely his doctor is unaware that this was to be a permanent separation. We also know that he was moved from place to place while his condition worsened, never staying still for long enough for anyone to grow too attached to him. What we don't know is why. The thing is, if John had been jaundiced, they could have treated it. They knew about phototherapy. They just didn't use it much. They also knew that sometimes children died in infancy and childhood. It was the biggest killer of all ages. But usually, it was obvious why. This child just got worse and worse without any clear reason why. When John was 6 months old, his mother visited him. She saw that he was thin and emaciated, but she was told that he was getting better. He was allowed no visitors, and so she didn't see him again until he was 2. By then, he was severely disabled. He couldn't speak. He had violent mood swings and uncontrollable epileptic fits. In 1909, George and Mary went on a tour of France and Canada, leaving poor little John behind. It seems that he remained in the care of his mother's lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Audine, who appears to have loved him very much. In December 1910, John's father wrote a letter to Lord Elphinstone, Viceroy of India, and asked him to choose a suitable institution in England where our poor little John can be placed under proper medical treatment. Then in January, he and Mary went to see John in their French country house. It's believed that Mary thought that John had been neglected and had lost hope of his recovery. But George refused to let her take him back to London and the royal household, and she never saw him again. Although she never stopped loving him and asking about him. George eventually decided that John should go to live at Fortnum House, the home of the Duke and Duchess of Portland in Kensington Gardens. That same year, he paid the Duke £3,000 for taking John in, saying that the sum was intended to cover the cost of special medical treatment. The payment was made through Lord Elphinstone, and the entry for it in the accounts said merely that it was a payment to an Indian institution. It was done to hide what had really happened to the lost prince. Nobody was ever told, not even John's doctors, until decades later. John lived a strange life at Fortune House, cut off from his family and his country, visited only by Mrs. Audine, who took care of him until her own death in 1927. He was largely left alone in a room with only a bed and a bucket to amuse himself, wearing the same clothes day after day. There were no toys or books or games. Eventually, he began to pull out his hair and eat it. At one point, he managed to get hold of some polish from the drawing room and painted it on his walls. It seems unlikely that he understood what was happening to him, but he was definitely aware that something was seriously wrong. Meanwhile, he became a virtual prisoner in the royal family, unable to leave Fortune House except for very brief periods. He never walked outside again and spent much of his life sitting by the window watching the world go by. In time, his moods became more placid and he seemed to find some comfort in routine. He liked to watch the clocks around the house chime and he would sit for hours looking at pictures in magazines. He died in 1919, age 13, probably of pneumonia, having suffered a series of epileptic fits. No one knows precisely what killed him, nor was anyone informed of his death for several weeks. It was kept secret and his body cremated without ceremony or identification. His ashes were buried in a grave marked only with a number in the royal burial ground at Frogmore, near Windsor Castle. It wasn't until 1961, 4 decades later, that his remains were exhumed and moved to St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. The mystery of what had happened to the lost prince was finally solved when his doctors revealed the truth of what had happened to him. But what if Prince John hadn't died? What if he had survived and been allowed to lead a normal life? Well, first of all, he wouldn't have been the lost prince, obviously. But he would have been different, damaged in some way by his experiences. He would have been born into a life of privilege, but his disabilities would have made it hard for him to make his way in the world. I think he would have been kept away from the public eye and educated privately at home. He would have been a disappointment to his father, King George, who wanted strong sons to carry on the dynasty. And I think he would have been rather overshadowed by his elder brother Edward, who was very charismatic. That said, he would have had a very devoted mother. And had he married and had children, he would have provided his father with the grandchildren he craved. It is quite possible that he would have been installed as Duke of York and received a lot of public sympathy because of his disability. But I do believe that he would have struggled throughout his life with the effects of whatever had poisoned him as a baby. I think he would have been a sweet-natured person, though, and perhaps very artistic, as many autistic people are. He would have been very bright and would have absorbed a lot of information. But sadly, I also believe that he would have been very lonely. So if Prince John had survived, he would have had a hard and lonely life, but he wouldn't have been forgotten. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe and give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode. And I'll see you next time.